I was looking at cathedral construction records when I noticed something odd about the pipe organs. Notre Dame de Paris, 1868. Organ specifications: 8,000 pipes, frequency range 16 Hz to 8,000 Hz. That lower number caught my attention, 16 Hz, below human hearing. Why would a musical instrument need to produce sounds humans can't consciously hear? Cologne Cathedral, 1863. Similar specifications. The power requirements didn't match musical needs. These were machines engineered to generate specific frequencies at levels that would resonate through stone, through bodies, through everything within range. And then in 1878, they stopped, suddenly. Across Europe, North America, Russia, cathedral organs were removed, modified, or silenced. Official explanation: liturgical reform. But when you examine what was removed, that explanation falls apart. These weren't random modifications. They were surgical eliminations of specific frequencies. Strasbourg Cathedral organ, completed in 1878, the largest in the world. Within 6 months, half its pipes were removed. Official record says excessive volume disturbed worshippers. But the removed pipes weren't the loudest. They were the deepest, producing frequencies between 8 Hz and 20 Hz, below conscious hearing but exactly in the range that affects human physiology. This wasn't about volume, this was about frequency. And someone decided in 1878 that cathedrals could no longer generate them. The pattern appears everywhere. Vienna, London, Prague, Baltimore, Montreal. Major cathedrals built between 1850 and 1875 with massive organs. Then, between 1878 and 1885, systematic modifications eliminating the same frequencies. The low end, the infrasound, the resonance range. Cathedral architecture tells the story. These buildings weren't designed for worship alone. Notre Dame's main hall, 427 feet long, 157 feet wide, 115 feet high. Those aren't arbitrary. They create specific resonance patterns. The stone pillars space to enhance bass frequencies and create zones of acoustic pressure. The organs fit into this architecture like precision instruments into laboratory equipment. Pipes positioned to direct sound into architectural resonance chambers. Frequencies calibrated to match the building's harmonic response. And it worked. Medical records from the 1860s to 1870s describe cathedral therapy. Patients with chronic conditions would spend hours in cathedrals during organ performances. And they got better. Physicians documented measurable improvements. Chronic pain lessened. Inflammation reduced. Respiratory capacity improved. Not spiritual healing. Physical changes. The physicians couldn't explain the mechanism. They simply observed and documented that cathedral organ exposure had therapeutic effects. Then it stopped. Medical literature on cathedral therapy ends in 1879. No explanation, no follow-up. Papers simply stop being cited. The timing is exact. Medical literature dies when organs are being modified. The last published study appears early 1879. By then, cathedral organs were already being dismantled. The source removed as doctors stopped writing about the effect. Someone connected the dots. Someone realized that the healing effect wasn't mysterious at all. It was the frequencies, the specific subsonic vibrations these organs produced. And once that connection was made, both the treatment and the source had to be suppressed simultaneously. The modifications weren't random acts by individual church administrations. They were coordinated. Documentation shows that directives came from central church authorities, often from Rome itself. Papal communications from 1878 reference reform of sacred music and proper limits on organ construction, standard church bureaucracy language. But attached to these directives were technical specifications, Maximum pipe lengths, prohibited frequency ranges required modifications to existing instruments. This wasn't musical guidance. This was engineering specifications. Someone with technical knowledge of acoustic physics was determining which frequencies cathedrals could no longer produce. And that guidance was being implemented worldwide, across different denominations, with remarkable consistency. The Catholic Church issued guidelines. So did the Anglican Communion, Lutheran synods in Germany, Orthodox churches in Russia, Reformed churches in Switzerland. Different theologies, different traditions, different administrative structures, but identical technical specifications for organ modification, all targeting the same frequency range, all removing the same capabilities. This level of coordination requires explanation. Churches don't cooperate on technical matters with this precision. Someone was coordinating across denominational lines with enough authority to make churches comply. Look at Westminster Abbey. Organ rebuilt 1876. By 1879, modified again. Deepest pipes removed. Specifications called for elimination of all frequencies below 30 Hz. No musical reason. St. Stephen's Cathedral, Vienna. Organ completed 1860. Gutted 1878. Baltimore Basilica. Organ from 1866 with extraordinary bass capabilities. Pipes to 16 Hz. In 1880, gone. No record of where they went. This pattern repeats across dozens of cathedrals. Different official reasoning each time, but identical technical result. Frequencies below 30 Hz, eliminated everywhere. Simultaneously, coordinated. The engineers who built these organs knew what they were creating. Their journals reveal understanding of frequency and resonance far beyond what was publicly acknowledged. They wrote about therapeutic harmonics and resonant healing chambers in private correspondence. They calculated power in pressure waves per square meter, not musical terms. They designed airflow to maintain specific frequencies for hours. This was medical engineering, disguised as instrument construction. One builder's letter from 1869 describes Cologne Cathedral testing. The sustained tone at 14 Hz produced measurable vibration throughout the nave. Subjects report sensation of warmth and easing of joint stiffness after 30 minutes exposure. That's an engineer documenting therapeutic effect. Cathedral authorities who commissioned these organs must have understood. You don't spend years and enormous sums without knowing the purpose. After 1878, builders received different specifications. Smaller pipes, limited ranges, no infrasound. The same master craftsman building to requirements that eliminated healing frequencies while maintaining musical function. Letters from the 1880s show frustration. One complains new specifications serve no musical purpose and eliminate capabilities that made previous instruments masterworks. He couldn't say explicitly what was lost, but he knew. The cathedrals themselves tell the story. Sit in Notre Dame, in the acoustic sweet spot directly in front of where the largest pipes once stood, and you can feel the absence. The space still resonates. The architecture still amplifies certain frequencies. But the source is gone. The specific patterns that once filled this chamber with therapeutic sound no longer exist, because they were removed, deliberately, systematically. In 1878 and the years immediately following, the frequencies that healed were silenced. The resonance that affected physiology was eliminated. The acoustic power that turned cathedrals into healing chambers was banned. What they replaced it with tells you everything. Modern cathedral organs, even large ones, are limited to frequencies above 32 Hz. They produce music, beautiful music, sacred music that fills the space with sound. But they don't produce the subsonic resonance that the old instruments generated. They don't create the standing wave patterns that filled entire buildings with therapeutic vibrations. They're musical instruments, not healing machines. And that's the point. After 1878, cathedrals were no longer allowed to heal. They could inspire faith. They could provide community space. They could fill the air with gorgeous music that moved the soul. But they couldn't generate the specific frequencies that affected human health. That capability was systematically removed. The question is why? What was threatening about the fact that certain sound frequencies could improve health? Why did someone with enough authority to influence church policy worldwide decide that this technology had to be suppressed? And why specifically in 1878? The timing connects to other events. The late 1870s saw major reorganization in both Catholic and Protestant church hierarchies. Power was consolidating. Local control was yielding to central authority. But the changes went beyond church politics. This was part of a broader transformation in how Western society organized healing and medicine. New medical licensing laws were being implemented across Europe and America. Before 1878, medicine was relatively decentralized. Many practitioners, many approaches, limited government oversight. After 1878, systematic regulation. Only licensed physicians could practice. Only approved treatments could be used. Medicine became an institution with gatekeepers. The pharmaceutical industry was consolidating in the same period. Companies that would become giants, Bayer, Merck, Pfizer, were establishing monopolies on drug production. Academic medicine was standardizing around germ theory and chemical interventions. The medical establishment we recognize today was being constructed in the 1870s and 1880s. All of these developments shared something. They centralized authority over what counted as legitimate healing. And frequency therapy through cathedral organs didn't fit the emerging model. It was too accessible, too decentralized, too independent of the medical establishment being constructed in that exact period. If cathedrals could heal through sound, people didn't need physicians for certain conditions. They didn't need prescriptions or treatments available only through licensed practitioners. They didn't need to purchase drugs from pharmaceutical companies. They just needed access to the building and exposure to specific frequencies during organ performance. Free. Available to anyone who walked through the door. No intermediaries, no fees, no institutional control. That undermined everything the new medical establishment was building. Healing couldn't be free and accessible. It had to be controlled, monitored, licensed, profitable. Cathedral therapy represented a competing model of healing that threatened the medical monopoly being established. So it had to go. Not through direct prohibition, that would have been too obvious. Through technical regulation that sounded reasonable. Organs were too loud. Music needed standardizing. Modern worship required different acoustic environments. All plausible. All masking the real purpose. Eliminating therapeutic frequencies from public spaces. The technology had to be suppressed. The frequencies had to be silenced. And the knowledge of what these organs could do had to be erased from public awareness. Within a generation, no one remembered that cathedrals had once been healing chambers. They were just beautiful old buildings with nice music, historic monuments, cultural heritage, not medical facilities. But the evidence remains. The architectural specifications that don't make sense for worship alone. The organ pipe configurations designed for frequency generation, not music. The medical records describing therapeutic effects that suddenly vanished. The papal directives limiting frequencies with engineering precision. All of it pointing to the same conclusion. Cathedrals were built as resonance chambers for frequency healing. The organs were precision instruments for generating therapeutic sound. For at least 2 decades, this technology was known and used, and then it was deliberately suppressed. The frequencies were banned, the instruments were silenced, and the knowledge was buried. Now, we're left with the shells. Beautiful buildings that still possess the architectural capacity for resonance but lack the instruments to generate it. The organs remain, but they're shadows of what once existed. They play music, they don't heal, because healing was exactly what someone decided they shouldn't do. The cathedrals themselves are evidence of what's missing. Stand in the center of Notre Dame and listen to the organ. Feel how the sound moves through the space. Imagine it 20 times more powerful, producing frequencies you can't hear, but your body can feel. Frequencies calibrated to resonate with human tissues. Acoustic patterns designed to affect physiology. That's what was there. That's what was removed. In 1878, the healing stopped. The frequencies were silenced, and medicine took a very different path, one that required intermediaries, prescriptions, and licensed control over healing, one that didn't include free access to therapeutic sound in public buildings. The organs they silenced weren't just musical instruments. They were frequency generators. Healing technology, accessible to anyone who entered a cathedral. And in 1878, someone decided that access had to end. But the evidence survives because no one thought to destroy the buildings themselves. The architectural proportions remain intact. The acoustic properties persist. The spaces still resonate at the frequencies they were designed for. They just lack the instruments that once filled them with therapeutic sound. Walk into any Gothic cathedral, and you're standing in a carefully engineered resonance chamber. A healing facility designed with acoustic precision we still don't fully understand. But the machinery that made it work, the massive organs with their subsonic capabilities, that's gone. The removal was surgical in its precision. Keep the buildings as monuments to faith and history. Preserve the artistic heritage. Maintain the musical tradition with smaller, less powerful organs. Just eliminate the specific frequencies that actually healed. Make it about culture and architecture and beauty. Never mention that these were once public health facilities. Never acknowledge that thousands of people came here specifically for healing. That understanding had to die. And it almost did. The knowledge came close to vanishing completely. Another generation or two, and it might have been lost forever, dismissed as medieval superstition. But enough documentation survived. Enough architectural evidence remains. Enough engineering specifications were preserved in organ builders' workshops and cathedral archives. And when you piece it together, when you connect the medical records, the construction specifications, the 1878 modifications, and the deliberate suppression of inquiry, you see what they tried to hide. Gothic cathedrals weren't primarily religious structures, at least not in origin. They were healing centers. Massive public health infrastructure disguised as churches. The organs weren't instruments for worship music alone. They were medical devices for generating therapeutic frequencies. The services weren't just religious ceremonies. They were treatment sessions. People came for healing, and the sound, specific, calculated, engineered sound, provided it. For centuries, this worked. Generation after generation benefited from cathedral healing without necessarily understanding the mechanism. It was simply known that spending time in cathedrals during organ performances made people feel better. The faithful attributed it to divine grace. The physicians who documented it called it cathedral therapy and couldn't explain why it worked. But it worked. Then, in the mid-1800s, someone understood. Someone with knowledge of acoustics and physiology mapped the frequencies. Someone recognized the technology for what it was. Someone realized these weren't just old buildings and musical instruments. They were sophisticated healing machines, and they'd been operating in plain sight for centuries. and someone decided it couldn't continue, not because it didn't work, because it worked too well, because it provided healing outside the emerging control structures, because free public access to therapeutic technology threatened the medical establishment being constructed in the 1870s, because healing that required no doctors, no prescriptions, no fees, and no institutional permission undermined the entire model of medicine that was being standardized. So, in 1878, under cover of liturgical reform and musical standardization, the frequencies were silenced. Churches were told their organs were too loud, too powerful, unsuited for modern worship. Technical specifications were issued limiting pipe, lengths, and frequency ranges. The healing infrastructure was systematically dismantled across the entire Western world, and the knowledge was buried, not destroyed, which would leave obvious traces, but simply allowed to fade from memory, dismissed as unscientific if anyone mentioned it, written out of history. But history doesn't erase that easily. The buildings still stand. The specifications survive in archives. The medical records exist in dusty library collections. The engineering notes remain in manuscript form. And when you know what to look for, when you understand that cathedrals were healing centers and organs were therapeutic instruments, the evidence becomes undeniable. You can still see it in the architecture. The acoustic calculations are visible in the proportions. Cathedral naves aren't randomly sized. They're precisely dimensioned to create standing waves at specific frequencies. The height-to-width ratios, the spacing of pillars, the curve of vaults, all calculated for acoustic resonance, and you can measure it. Modern acoustic equipment can map how these buildings would respond to different frequencies. Input a 16 Hz tone into Notre Dame and watch how the entire structure would vibrate in sympathy. The stone itself is tuned. The architecture is a musical instrument, or, more accurately, a medical instrument, waiting for the right frequencies to activate it. The organ chambers tell the story too. They're often far larger than the modern organs that fill them. Empty space where massive pipes once stood. Sealed openings where subsonic pipes were removed. Structural features that don't make sense unless you understand they were housing much more powerful instruments. The buildings remember what was taken from them, and occasionally, very occasionally, an unmodified organ survives. Not in major cathedrals, those were all systematically updated, but in small churches that escaped notice, in private chapels that weren't subject to official directives. Instruments that still have their full frequency range because nobody bothered to modify them. And when those organs are played, people report feeling something. Warmth, vibration, relief from pain. The same effects documented in the medical literature before 1879. These surviving instruments prove it wasn't imagination. The therapeutic effects were real. The frequencies did something measurable to human bodies, and the suppression was about eliminating that specific capability while leaving the musical function intact. The question that remains isn't why they did it. We can understand that. Control, profit, institutional power, medical monopoly. These are comprehensible motivations. The deeper question is what else they suppressed. What other technologies from previous eras were identified and eliminated in this way? What other capabilities were deliberately banned and forgotten? Because if they could suppress cathedral healing this thoroughly, if they could take a technology that thousands of people used and turn it into forgotten history within a single generation, what else did they do? What other knowledge was deliberately lost? What other capabilities do these old buildings possess that we're no longer allowed to understand? The cathedrals stand as evidence, not just of what was silenced in 1878, but of what might still be hidden. Technologies we've forgotten, capabilities we don't recognize, knowledge buried so thoroughly we don't even know to look for it. The organs they silenced are just one example, one thread. Pull it, and the entire fabric of accepted history starts to unravel. Stand in a cathedral. Listen to the modern organ, feel the space, and understand that what you're experiencing is a shadow of what once was. A remnant of something far more powerful that was deliberately taken away. The healing frequencies that once filled this space, frequencies that could ease pain, reduce inflammation, improve respiratory function, those are gone. Banned, suppressed, forgotten. But the potential remains. The architecture still resonates. The acoustic properties persist. The engineering is still there in the stone and space. All that's missing is the knowledge and the will to restore what was lost. To rebuild organs that can generate therapeutic frequencies. To reclaim cathedrals as healing centers instead of just tourist attractions. To remember that these buildings were built for a purpose beyond worship, and that purpose was systematically taken away from us. In 1878, they silenced the organs. They banned the frequencies. They suppressed the healing, and they hoped we'd forget it ever existed. The question is, now that we know, what do we do about it?